My name is John Arthur, and I teach 6th grade, all subjects, but social studies is my favorite. I also teach my students debate, and each year I take a team from my class to compete in the elementary state debate tournament. Watching a 12-year-old deliver a finely crafted argument is a thing of beauty. I love showing students how a single piece of evidence can tie the whole thing together. However, like a house of cards, remove even one piece of evidence and your entire argument could come crashing down. As you can tell, I love metaphors, similes, analogies, anything that helps my students see the thing that I'm trying to describe to them. And that's actually what I'm here to share with you today. A metaphor, one that I use every year to teach my students how to structure a winning argument. It's simple, this metaphor makes sense, and it paints a clear, memorable picture in the minds of students. But first, we have to define a few key terms just so we're all on the same page. To do that, I'd like to tell you a little story. This is me in 1st grade. Before this picture was taken, I went to my teacher, as children know what to do, and told her that I needed to go to the bathroom. She looked at me and said, "No, you don't. Get back in line." I didn't know what to say to her, so I got back in line. And as I stood there stewing in line, of course, I wanted her to let me go to the bathroom. But more than that, I wanted her to believe me when I told her that I needed to go to the bathroom. That's actually one key difference between persuasion and argument. The goal of persuasive writing is to convince your audience that you're right and maybe they ought to do something about it. Whereas the goal of an argument is to reveal the truth and convince your audience that your side is the most valid and worthy of their consideration. So, when I went back and told my teacher again that I had to pee real bad, I wasn't really trying to convince her to let me go. I was trying to prove to her that I actually had to go. I have to pee. That was my claim, my argument. Her counterclaim, no, you don't. My teacher and I were both drawing our conclusions from the same body of evidence. Literally, my bouncing heel on the ground, my hands tucked between my thighs, my torso folding in upon itself. I don't know what her reasoning was, how she was interpreting the evidence in her mind, but she decided that I was lying and faking and wouldn't let me go. This is probably the perfect time to distinguish between evidence and proof, because they're not exactly the same thing. Evidence is information that still allows for personal and professional judgment in drawing conclusions. Different people can look at the same evidence and determine very different things, whereas proof is incontestable and absolute. I had plenty of evidence that I needed to pee. However, I didn't actually have proof until my pants were soaking wet. I peed my pants. But I won the argument, right? Now, as I see it, there are 5 things you need when designing a winning argument. First and most important is your evidence. Then you've got your reasoning, claim, counterclaims, and personal finishes that help make the argument your own. It's only 5 things, but it's still difficult for students to keep it all straight without some sort of a picture that helps them visualize how those parts are interconnected and work together. So I came up with this metaphor. I told my students that if you were able to grab hold of an argument, bring it into the real world, set it down on the table, this is what it would look like. A layer cake. I even had one hiding under the table. I pulled it out, boom, set it down on the table, and all my students said, "Ooh." You should do it too, because then you get to eat cake. The first part of the layer cake is evidence. That's the cakey center, the most important part. There are 2 kinds of evidence that students can layer into their arguments. The first is quantitative, numerical or statistical information, and the second is qualitative, descriptive information. So stories, case studies, testimonies. Both do different things, and for different kinds of arguments, you're going to want different kinds of evidence. Right? Sometimes you'll want to alternate one layer after another, quantitative, qualitative, quantitative. And other times you're going to want layer upon layer of the same kind of evidence. It all depends on what's going to help you prove your point and be the most satisfying to your audience. But there are some things that you don't want to do with your evidence. You don't want to stack evidence that doesn't work together to support your claim. Random bits of information that doesn't form a cohesive argument. Sometimes you're going to have layers that are thicker or thinner than the rest, and that's cool. But what you can have is a cake made of one thin layer of evidence. I'll often say to a student, this isn't a layer cake. This is a pancake. Your evidence is too thin and flat. The most important thing for kids to take away from that is that evidence is the thing. If you got rid of all the rest and you just had layers of evidence, good evidence that makes sense together, stacked on a plate, I could still cut it up and enjoy. Between and around each layer of cake is frosting holding it together. That's your reasoning, the thinking that connects your various pieces of evidence to form a cohesive and coherent argument. On each layer of evidence, you apply your reasoning. And then when you're done, you spread it around the outside, smoothing out the bumps in your thinking. The top layer of frosting, straight and even, is your claim, held up by the evidence and reasoning supporting it. Traditionally, we've taught students to start with a claim or thesis and go out in search of evidence that confirms what they already believe. However, the best arguments start with a thorough analysis of all the evidence and then leads to the strongest claim based on that evidence. Okay? Basically, you got to build an argument from the bottom up, from your evidence and reasoning up to your claim. Now, at this point, you have a cake, right? A complete argument that's ready to serve. There are recipes you can follow, graphic organizers, mnemonics like race and Oreo, etc., that build an argument like this one. They're fine. Grocery store cakes that are okay so long as your evidence and reasoning are good. However, I want my students designing custom designer cakes each and every time. To take their arguments to the next level, I teach my students to acknowledge and dismantle counterclaims, right? Arguments drawn from the same evidence that differ from their own. It's about engaging the other side of the argument. And I use the piped frosting around the base of the layer cake to remind students that it's always an option. You don't have to have it, but it makes your argument that much better. Finally, there are the decorative finishes on top of the cake. Sprinkles, berries, whipped cream, pizzazz, the personal touches and style that students can bring to their own work. Our kids need to know that they each have a unique voice that is valuable. No one should be able to write your arguments but you. That includes their own personal stories and experiences, qualitative evidence that they can use to personally connect their audience and themselves to the topic at hand. I mean, think about the arguments our students have been making the last few years. Black Lives Matter, March for Our Lives, LGBT rights, Save the Planet, Let the Dreamers Stay. These are arguments built on the lived experiences of marginalized people. Our kids are out there right now, swaying public opinion and moving hearts as well as minds by sharing what they've learned living in their own skin. That is powerful evidence. Designing a winning evidence-based argument is a life skill, and the layer cake helps students internalize how it's done. I wish I'd known all this back in first grade. But honestly, I was just hoping some adult would swoop in and come to my defense. Remember, our students don't need us to defend them. They need us to teach them how to defend themselves. That's what this is all about.